Thanks for joining me as we explore the question, can science fiction be Christian? Is Christian sci-fi a real thing? Is it legitimate? Is it appropriate? Is it real or honest, genuine or valid? Otherwise known as, and Eric is not joining me this morning. We're flying solo because he's getting ready for the convention, which is coming up this weekend. We're going to have highlights for that next week. Whatever we hit on the convention, there's some of the highlights for that. And then this next Thursday morning, we're going to be talking about setting that up, what's going to be in the convention, some of the expectations that we have. It's behind the scenes look at what's going on behind it. So the question for tonight is Christian science fiction a real thing, or should it even exist? The poll proposed this question: can science fiction be Christian? Well, I guess the first question is, of course, only people can be Christian, but is the fiction itself, and science fiction specifically, can Christian science fiction actually exist? And I think the answer would be yes. We had overwhelmingly 97% respondents said yes, it can. And nobody said Christians shouldn't read fiction. And we had 3% say Christians should keep out. I'm wondering if those were just trolls or if there's anybody that was really seriously answering that question or not. But we did have some other responses here in people who, oh no, don't give yourself a thumbs down. Some of the responses to this, I want to take a look at the comments that were written. Sherry said, it is in the storytelling, yes. So she's saying that basically you can, but it's how it's wrapped up in the story itself. It depends on what the story is that would determine whether it's Christian or not. Alkaline Slime, wonderful name, said there is nothing to stop a Christian from writing science fiction. And I would agree. There's nothing technically keeping Christians from writing it at all. And I'm going to put something up right now. We got something in our live chat. Prowl says, yes, science fiction can be Christian. So I think overwhelmingly that is a resounding yes. I was kind of surprised with the answers for this because, I don't know, back in the day, maybe some really staunch people would say no, that fiction isn't part of the life of a believer. You can't do that. But I think overwhelmingly, most people are saying that it is. I also have another comment from Thomas Hall. Yes, Thomas, I realized just before going on that I had the wrong date put down for the live stream. It was posted as July 16th, and it's like, I'm going live in like less than a minute. So I had to make the change real quick. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to see if I can make this screen a little bit bigger because it's a little bit harder to see, I think. Okay, so then we had Saturin 4061 said, fiction is just fiction, but beware the messages behind it. I would say that, yeah, that is true. And Prowl 32, time travel is crazy, proving that, yes, time travel is just for Christians. We can do it. Tarii Deos, if I got the pronunciation right, said, why are Christians, would we limit ourselves from groups of people that can be reached? It's like groups in the 70s that say Christians can't do rock and roll, or the 80s that Christians shouldn't draw comics. Why? Where in the world does it say for us to limit the talents that God gave us? So this is probably a really good ethical question, and it would be a serious question, because is there anything intrinsically bad about those type of things, about comics, about certain genres of music, about fiction? I did come across one individual who was saying, no, we should not waste our time at all with those type of things. What's going on in the world is far too serious. We should just focus on that. And I guess there's maybe a little bit of a point to that, but there's also something to be said about being able to reach people. And you could also do that through these other mediums. I'm going to put another comment here from the live chat. Villainous, by the way, guys, I appreciate the fact that you're actually there, even though I did have this originally on the 18th. He said, Well, Lord of the Rings is sort of Christian, so why not? And we're going to be talking about that one too, Tolkien. And we did talk about him in previous live streams. We'll be bringing that up again. What about the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis? Exactly. These are ones that other people had brought up before. Then we also have user, and I'm almost tempted to think this is Thomas. User JI1 such and such as not related, but as an engineering nerd, I think you would like this anti-grav technology being worked at Exodus Propulsion Technologies. Theoretically, we could one day get to the moon in less than 3 hours. And he and I did a little bit of nerding it out and talking about some of the calculations that were involved here. But yeah, that was one thing that science fiction can do is it can start to open people's minds to the different possibilities of technology. I don't know how many different people I've talked to in engineering that said they were inspired by Star Trek, some of the original or next generation Star Trek, to say, hey, I saw what they were doing there. I really want to get involved, even though that's stuff that hasn't been made yet. And people are really inspired by that. So there's something to be said about storytelling being inspirational, and inspirational for a good reason, not just for something that's supercilious or anything like that. But yeah, actually some good stuff. And user blah, blah, blah is me. I thought so. I don't know how many times I've seen that, but you have a different name here. So I didn't know what the deal was with that. He says he's not. Oh, so that was maybe something within YouTube itself that triggers that. Callum says, enough said on my part. God be with you all. I guess you've already chimed in for it. And Villainous, there was a book on cyberpunks ages ago, and now I don't know if you're going to be finishing that off or not. But while you are, I'm going to switch back over to the second poll that we had. And the second poll said, what turns fiction into Christian fiction? If you agree with one more than one answer, please pick your primary response and respond below. So this was one that was a little bit difficult to phrase. I wasn't quite sure how to phrase it, but I really did want to get people's responses on this. The answers were either the author must be Christian, or Christian theology must be a primary message in the story, or it must be clean, no sex, violence, or foul language. Clean, basically G-rated, maybe PG, but definitely not R, anything beyond that. Then you do have an answer that says it must be mild, no sex, but limited violence and foul language, and other. Now, some of the responses I got to this, the discussion in here, was really good. Some of the thinking behind it. So I'm going to look at some of the chat responses. It says, Reginald and something needs to be both written by a Christian and consistent with Christian themes, regardless of how central they are. I think he's right with this, and maybe you guys can disagree with me in the chat. I really don't have a firm answer for this to say if the definition of Christian fiction, is it something hard and fast that it hits to hit certain bullet points? And the reason why I'm really interested in this is because I've written things in the past where I've been accused of, well, you said this thing was Christian, but there's nothing really Christian about it. Or even like the Lord of the Rings, somebody might talk about, and we're going to be discussing that in a minute here. You watch that and you think, I wouldn't really call that Christian fiction, but it was written by a Christian, and the overall themes that were in there were definitely biblically framed, if not, he's not quoting scripture in there, obviously, because Middle Earth would have predated that. But still, there's some other things. So we can bring that up here in a bit. And I'm going to get to the live chat. I just want to hit another one of these first before moving on. Carol said, I would say that it must be a Christian message running throughout, perhaps barely perceptible to those who are not attuned to such a thing, but enough to cause reflection. This would be more far-reaching, in my opinion, and implies that the author is a Christian. Yeah, now there seems to be a sweet spot, depending on who your audience is. Is your audience specifically Christian, or are you looking for a broader audience in such a way that you don't want to be preachy or teachy and really turn people off? This was the type of thing that Jesus was struggling with, I think, when he was bringing parables, because they said, why are you talking in parables? His disciples said that because he said, and he quotes the Old Testament, that they would be always seeing but never perceiving, always hearing and never understanding, lest they might turn and be saved. So there is something that must be caught here when throwing this out. And another rule for writing is you don't want to be so over the top with your readers. You want to treat them with respect, not just beat them over the head with things that are obvious. You want subtlety should be in there. And I think the same should be said about the gospel. But I've had people come back at me and say, listen, basically, you don't have the Romans Road in there. You don't have scripture that you're quoting. And there's somebody that didn't get saved during during your story. So it's not Christian. I said, well, call it what you want. But I am also trying to reach a larger audience here. And some of the first short story that I have out, A Taste of Earth, does not have, let me put the picture up right here. Taste of Earth does not have overt Christian themes in it. There's things that are just barely touched on. There's a question of salvation with an alien involved. And that's why we were talking about, is salvation just for human beings in a previous live stream. So those kind of subtle questions are there, and hopefully be able to start raising some questions that people have in their own minds. Challenge people's thinking. That's part of what's there too. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the chat because you guys are I got some fantastic responses from you guys in here too. I don't want to miss any of it. Yeah, I think you're clarifying what we're saying earlier. I say that as sometimes the imagination of authors can come into reality, can help look outside the square. Yes, look outside the box. And Jesus was doing that with saying the kingdom of heaven is like a sower sowing seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a rich man who is talking about his grain. Things like that are common everyday occurrences that people can grab a hold of, and then he would put within that kingdom principles and say, okay, it's like this, and starting to reframe their thinking and get them out of maybe what the Pharisees were saying that things needed to be. He was going to bring some new thought to it. Why can't therefore we use this different genres to imagine God working in the world? So if you've ever read like any of C.S. Lewis's writings, whether it's the Chronicles of Narnia, Space Trilogy that you mentioned earlier, Screwtape Letters that we did a review on, all these really do sort of open your minds to think, and it's got to be biblically based, right? When you start talking about stuff like this, but they do open your mind, and that's what the fiction has done. Prowl 32 said, "What does Earth taste like?" You're gonna have to read and find out. I'm not gonna spoil it. Breakfast gun. Holy cow, dude! How you doing? How many fingers does that hand have? You're gonna make me put it back up. Okay, so let's take a look at. And I'm gonna move this side here. How many fingers does it have? 4. 4 fingers and 1 thumb. Are you kidding me? Is there another finger in there? Holy cow! I got to change the artwork if that's the case. Okay, we're gonna get rid of the multi-fingered hand if that really is the case. Now you got me paranoid. I'm gonna take a look at it and see if it's actually there. Villa said, GTG work, peace to everyone. Okay. Adios, senor. Thank you for joining us. We shall see you soon. And then dirt. Yes, that's what it probably tastes like. I'm counting 5. And the thumb. I'm going to have to look at that again. Oh! I replaced the old artwork. And maybe it's the alien. Maybe it's the alien's hand. Maybe just leave it at that. Say there's an alien there, and then go with it. Golly, I want you to look at that again. The 5-fingered man. Maybe it's the one that got in Hugo Montoya's father. We'll stick with that. Okay, so some other comments that were made during the poll. Joy 5539 says, I don't think theology needs to be the primary focus, but the characters will have motivations that are undeniably honorable to God in some way. I think compassion between classic fantasy like Lord of the Rings and Narnia they weren't just written by Christians, their values permeated them. C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy is a good example. This one just keeps on coming up, and I think it's a good example. And Davos said, I think that science fiction can be Christian if it were written by a Christian and Christian themes and ideas. It does not need to preach or teach Christianity or Christian beliefs. People can tell when they are being preached to and when they have a good story in front of them. I think Christian science fiction should focus on the characters, the situations themselves in. These characters do not need to be Christians themselves, but the world they inhabit would be created from a Christian point of view. That's where people feel the difference between Christian and non-Christian writing. I think he hit it 100% on the head here. So I have a scene, not in this story, but it's in a novel. I have a scene in the novel where it takes place in a prison. And so besides the violence and everything, I pretty much keep myself clean without cussing a whole lot. But in this scene, guys in prison, let's just put it this way. There's a guy who's across the yard in the prison and he yells at another, and it's Christmas Eve. And everything is MFer there. It's as cold as an MFer. It's as hot as an MFer. And I'm thinking, what is it? I'm censoring myself here. So, and what is this MFer? It's like everything in between. And so he yells across the yard. He says, "Merry Christmas, MFer!" And it was said as a nice greeting. It was a term of endearment. If you have a scene like that, or if you got soldiers in a foxhole, or if you got whatever the situation is, it's a factory environment. I think that you would want to clean it up pretty well, but at some point, if you clean it up so much, the language, it's not going to sound real. It's not going to be realistic. If you look at the Bible itself in terms of violence, how much violence is in the Bible? I mean, there's one scene in Judges where it talks about this evil ruler being killed, and the guy takes his sword or his knife and does this skewers him in the gut, and it goes all the way up to the hilt. I mean, it describes that in the Bible. We're not talking about G-rated here. There's portions of the Bible that are probably R-rated. So if you're going to look, the crucifixion of Christ, I don't know how The Chosen is going to show that when they finally get to the crucifixion of Christ. Are they going? That's brutal. Like the Passion of the Christ, when they had that video, that show, they showed everything. We need to see. I think as adults, we need to see that. Just like with Saving Private Ryan, you have D-Day, the storming the beaches of Normandy, and seeing this guy. He's got his arm blown off, and he's walking around holding his arm. Look, he's confused. He's shell-shocked. He doesn't know what to do. We need to, as adults, see that, understand how bad war is, to say, listen, avoid at all costs. This is not something you just rush into. So I think it's worth having that type of criteria that's there. And okay, so we're back to the hand. I'm going to look at the comments here. We're back to the hand. It says, yeah, I think that will work. I think we were talking about the aliens. I've seen cats with 6 toes. Yeah, you do have people with 5 fingers, right? So we do have that too. I saw 50 fingers on that hand. Now you guys are just pulling my legs. I am already nervous. You don't have to do that. And there's profanity in the Bible as well. Sometimes it was obscured in the English translation. Other times it was profanity for them and is not to us. Yeah, so profanity is largely culturally defined. I think it was either Paul or Peter. He was saying, basically, I count it all as garbage. All these great things that will be glory, all these things that people would strive for, a high title, maybe riches or whatever. He says, I count that all as rubbish for the sake of the cross. Well, the word isn't rubbish. It's been sanitized. And maybe we do need to have the right translation for that. I don't know. That's a good question. I just want to hit a couple more of these before we move on. There's some criteria. Again, we're trying to form this, and I think we're all on the same page here to say what is Christian science fiction. I think is a kind of a really broad category. Thomas Hall here. I'm looking at your comment here, buddy. Says, I agree with Andrew Clavin, whose work is inspired by his childhood heroes. Noir detective novels, art need not be cleaned up to display Christian themes. In fact, that often creates an inauthentic work, and art without sincerity is propaganda. This is just like what I was saying about the prison situation. I think there's ways that you can kind of dance around certain things. I mean, you're not going to show some of the really nasty stuff going on in prison. I mean, when we watch a movie, we don't see a guy going to the bathroom. You don't really need to see that scene unless it's pertinent to the plot. You know, something happens there, like he witnesses a murder or something. But you can clean some things up. You get to a point where it becomes plastic and unreal. And readers can see that when they're reading a story or somebody's watching a movie, they're attuned to that right away. And if you'll see that a lot with a lot of Christian movies. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you guys get the sense that some Christian movies are just like they just seem there's a certain sequence of events that seems like it needs to happen. Somebody needs to be saved. They usually have this typical salvation experience that are going on there. And I'm not trying to downplay that at all. You know, I'm sure that has reached people. I'm sure that has touched lives, but they seem to have, they sometimes come off as plastic. And if we're going to recapture the arts at all, we need to get away from that and maybe have to have something that's more authentic and having things that aren't over censored. Continuing with what your comment was, put more here. Wow, dude, really put it. It was a good comment though. All that said, the question of sin in art is one I go around and around in. It will always be a matter for me in the individual where conviction lays, since we are in different places. Most Christians today chastise any work with sex in it, usually rightfully so. I think nothing of hours of violence. Sometimes it is no doubt a matter of context, wherein the violence is comical, but then we would be less critical or of a comical sex scene. Do some Christians think they are okay without being convicted at times, and they're wrong? Is the overly prude Christian just as wrong in making a heavy joke? Sometimes I have to think about, well, these are some really good ethical questions. How far do you go to try to make it authentic? This is almost one of those things, you know it when you see it, because it all comes together. Like seeing somebody brutally murdered in a movie. I mean, showing all the blood and guts. You might say, I don't know, that might be pushing it too much. Yet you have Jesus on the cross. So it may be context sensitive. It all depends on the message that's being given behind it. So I think these are very good questions that do need to be answered. Joshua Wooden said, well, this question is almost an oxymoron if only C.S. Lewis did not write that Christianity is the true myth. We did talk about true myth before. This is a very good point. And from literature, C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, and J.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, all Christian art and very good art. When Christians themed art is loved by the secular world, that is a win for the writer and ultimately for Jesus. Yeah, I think we need to make art that either music, literature, whatever, that passes the plastic sniff test in the secular world. When we get art that's primo, that can pass it. Now we'll say, why are we focusing on art? What is it? Because it's conveying a message. Let's look at classical music. Bach. He's a Christian. He was writing music for his church. So, and you look back at some of the best literature that's been done, also Christian written. I think the church has made a very big mistake when we abandoned Hollywood and said, that's not for us. We're not going to have anything to do. Because culture, they create culture, and politics and everything else that in our society is downstream from that culture. It's very extremely important. We cannot win the culture war without it. Scubalon? Preface Gun, I have no idea what you have there, so maybe you can interpret that for me. Let me know what you mean by that. So there's pretty much an outline I have over here that I want to hit some points, but a lot of them had already been hit by our discussion here in the poll that was taken. And I think you guys are you're really right on. I think it shows that you've thought through these things before and asked some questions. Let me know. Do you think that as Christians we should try to excel in this type of thing, in art, literature, music, all the above? Is that something that the church should try to excel in, or just say it's just frivolous? It's a waste of time. So let me know what you think in the chat. Thank you. That did look like, I'm going to put that back up because it did look like a Greek word there. Scubalon. It sounds like something Shaggy and Scooby-Doo would do. Scubalon. That was the Greek word that Paul said. Okay, I consider all scubalon. That's kind of a cool word. I might have to use it sometime. Well, shoot. Maybe I slam my fingers in my car door or something like that. Maybe I'll say scubalon. Thomas Hall, you said the brutality of saving... I'm going to put this up, sorry. The brutality of Saving Private Ryan is a good example of violence with a good reason. War isn't pretty or glamorous, just like John Wayne movie, but the themes of a John Wayne are good. John Wayne movie are good too. Yeah, and you think about the era that John Wayne came from, there was the motion picture industry. They had a really tight censorship on it that I think kind of went away in the 1960s. But they couldn't have certain images or themes or words that were said. I think it was with Gone with the Wind was the first time, maybe one of the 7 words that you can't say on television was said. What's his name? Rhett said, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn. That was the first time I think that was said, and that kind of broke it a little bit. So we have in Saving Private Ryan, another one would be The Patriot. There was some brutal images in there, but it should be shown, because even at the beginning, Mel Gibson's character said he's experienced the war. He says, you don't want to do this. And it's a warning for every one of us. Sometimes I think that we get desensitized with as much violence as we see on TV. We might be willing to say, hey, I'll go ahead and do that. But if you got your buddy right next to you that gets blown away in a brutal way, it's going to come home real quick. And Thomas said, I think we should have both Christian writing for Christians and others for secular audiences. So here is, I think you're right, 100%. Let me share a little bit of insight with you. I wasn't planning on doing this, but since this is a really good discussion. When you go to, if you're going to go the indie published route, which means that you're doing the publishing instead of finding a publisher, which is a whole nother discussion. Maybe if there's any interest in, I'll talk with you guys about that. But if you go that route, you can put your work into categories. So Kindle, KDP, Kindle Publishing, Kindle Direct Publishing, when you go through that process, it'll allow you to select categories. Now, there's certain categories, there's a limited number of categories that you can put your book into, and they said they give you 3 different categories. So my book right now is actually number 1 and 2 of the my short story is actually number 1 and 2 of the categories. That's fantastic, but it's short-lived because it usually falls over time. So you have to kind of like keep it above water. And you do that with number of downloads and people that are interested in the amount of buzz. There's a whole algorithm behind it. But if you put it in those categories, there is all sorts of categories for LGBT, all sorts of other secular categories that would be out there. You say, okay, I'm going to put it under Christian Lit. That's not as prominent as some of the others. When you go to put your writing into the Christian category, you've got to find it. I believe it's under religious, and then it's a subcategory further on down. I wasn't planning on talking about this, so I don't know 100% if that's the case. But my point is that you get to be very niche. And usually the literature that you have in there is Amish. You don't have Christian science fiction. It almost sounds like the cult, Christian Science, right? So you don't have Christian sci-fi as a category necessarily. You have Christian futuristic, which is one of the categories that this short story is in. But you don't have sci-fi. And I don't know if you remember, but bookstores like Barnes and Nobles and others that you would be able to walk into, bricks and mortar bookstores, used to have sections that would be Christianity. You could see the categories of these different books, right? The different genres. You have Westerns, and you got self-help, and you got Christianity that's there. Well, in the local Barnes and Noble bookstore that we have here, walk in, you no longer have Christianity as one of the things. You have religious or spiritual and New Age. And somewhere shuffled in that shelf, somewhere on the bottom, you'll find Christian books. And I think what was happening is we're getting relegated more and more and more to the side. And Christians are also doing that. Sometimes bookstores will say, listen, we're just going to go with the flow here. Whatever people are buying, we're going to put out there. We're not going to put out dead books and use up shelf space. We want to have things move. We want product moving out. And if it's just sitting there, we're not going to do it. We're going to keep the categories that are whatever that's hot. And Christians often do not go for own literature. There is, you even think about the movies, some of the movies that we've had out. Angel Studios has been putting out some good ones recently. And although not specifically Christian, there are some other studios that are putting out clean literature. We should probably make sure that we're watching them, and they got to be good too at the same time. All right, some more comments. I just need to see what you have. Saving Private Ryan. Okay, so you had the books, and then Breakfast Gun, you said, we now have a section for spirituality. Yeah, it's just all kind of like put in there. It's a subcategory. So back to your point that you were making, Thomas, I think you're right that we should have both Christian writing and Christian for Christians and then for others. Having just clean books out there with Christian themes, I think is incredibly important, because if we don't, Christians are going to be relegated as to that crazy guy in the backwoods out there with the gun, just waiting to shoot somebody who's chanting about how he hates everybody. He's just a hater. We know that all Christians are haters, and that's where it's going to be relegated to. Throwing us under spiritual could be a good thing. Sometimes it might someone might grab it that might not have. Yeah. So, okay, that's a good point. Keeping it all there. So, I think that what we've done is we have defined Christian sci-fi. We said what kind of a theme there. Definitely written by a Christian. If not specifically Christian themes, at least a Christian world mindset that someone has there. And you may have main characters that do not have that mindset. Maybe the antagonists won't have the mindset. And another thing we have to do as Christian authors too is not make these caricatures of the secular world. Make them the corny bad guy as not. These are people that are struggling with real things, and I think we need to make in our literature make non-Christians real people as well. So I think we've done a pretty good job of categorizing what Christian science fiction would be. Here are some arguments against Christian fiction, at least Christian science fiction. It has perceived limitations because it can be preachy or teachy. It's over the top, and that can come off as being potential in alienating people that are not Christians. That's where I think a lot of the subtlety comes through, and also market reception. We have, if we label something specifically as Christian literature, it's going to be pushed off to that specific shelf. Would it be better just to say, hey, this is science fiction, and let it go at that, without being pigeonholed and then say, I don't want to read that because it's got the C word on it. Don't even want to talk about that. So are there examples of good, besides C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, which are fantastic, are there examples of other Christian authors, specifically in science fiction or fantasy, or maybe another fiction that you can bring to mind? I'm going to look at the chat for this and see if any of you guys have this in mind. Thomas Hall said, in the music world, I would prefer the old country singers that would do a few powerful gospel songs over most contemporary Christian music, which seems to be too one-noted. Yeah, I think there's been a quality of music that has dropped without examples of Christian literature. You may... The Wrinkle in Time, the book Wrinkle of Time, plus the movie that Disney has used. I'm thinking about doing a live stream on that, comparing both the movie and to the book, and seeing how Disney has basically silenced the Christian themes that were in there, because it was, I don't know if you actually call her a Christian. She was a universalist. She believed that everybody was saved by the blood of Christ, and then there's no one not going to heaven. But other than that, there are definitely Christian themes that are in there. I mean, she's quoting scripture in there. There's the light and the dark that are used in that story. I mean, Disney has sanitized that. You have Ted Dekker, another popular now Christian science fiction fantasy author, and Lawhead is another one. So let's see if you have anybody else. Graham Greene. Oh, let me put Breakfast Gun first. He said, I heard J.K. Rowling was a Christian and wrote with a Christian and never read the books and slept through the movies. Well, she's definitely not crossed the line with the whole trans thing, and she's been very much vilified by the left. I don't know. I've not followed her biography to see where she was coming from. And there has been enough in the books, I believe, that would not have drawn people closer to Christ, but maybe further away. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not sure what the situation is with her books, but that's a good question. Thomas Hall said, Graham Greene, End of the Affair, is a definitive Christian work from the point of view of an unbeliever, but not sci-fi or fantasy. And Dickens, Christmas Carol. Ooh. Yeah, the further back in time, it's harder to tell, to say, were they just culturally Christian or are they actually believers? But I don't know. At some point, does it really matter? Interesting. And how popular is Christmas Carol? How many times has that story been redone, rebooted? The Muppets got a hold of it. I like their rendition of it. I think it's pretty good. So yeah, all this comes together. I think I could pretty much wrap this up and say that we as believers, I think, need to, whatever field that we're working in, do our best and glorify God in it. If you look at when they built the tabernacle, when Moses said, hey, you're going to do this and this, I got these instructions from God, you're going to build the tapestry and it's going to have these colors in it. It's going to be so many cubits long, and it's going to be made of goat's fur, goat's hair, and everything like this. Is he's giving these instructions. He also said, and choose a craftsman worthy of his trade. You had people coming out of Egypt that may have been slaves working as gold craftsmen, as goldsmiths, and now they're working on the Ark of the Covenant. So there is a skill that if you are working in these fields, develop that skill. If you're a musician, practice. And as a writer, I've been writing for years. There's technique behind it that needs to be developed in the craft. All of these crafts. And when you're called for service, that guy who's a goldsmith working for the Egyptians, wandering in the desert, had no idea he was going to be recruited for working on such a great thing. I mean, what, the Ark of the Covenant, that'd be, and he had no idea Indiana Jones was going to be getting that thing a few years later. I mean, right? So there is that. Kamachi, late to the game here. Well, it's good to see you, brother. We're just basically talking about the different, is Christian science fiction, is it a thing, and should it be a thing? And I think we pretty much wrapped our arms around what the definition of Christian science fiction would be. And I'm going to be reviewing that here in just a bit. And also, is it something that we should strive for? The arts in general, is it something that Christians should strive for? I think so. And it's, unless you guys tell me otherwise, I don't see any objection to this at all in the chat. It's something that God can use in a way that people who may have their ears closed to words or situations, they'll never walk into a church. They'll never, when you say that certain platitudes that we'll give people, they're closed off to that. They might be open to hear other things. And so I think that's where the power of this comes through. Thomas Hall said, I'm thinking of doing a manga with angels and demons interacting with humanity. Well, I don't know, brother. I don't know if demons would actually, or angels would actually be, accepted in the manga community. I think that's just kind of like way outside their realm. I don't know. Just a thought. I could be wrong. But if you're an artist and if you can do that, and if you can do hands with just 4 fingers instead of 5, that would be really good. Yeah, I think you could. Plenty of themes that could be applied to science fiction stories. Yes. And for those of you just joining us, I'm going to put up our multi-fingered hand. He was counting. Gosh, I got to look in the shadow there. Is there another finger? I got to redo that image if that's the case. Just say it's an alien or it's a five-fingered man. 6-fingered man. Yeah. Okay, so there are many reasons why I think that we could have this. There are moral, ethical explorations that can be used with fiction. You could explore deeper questions about humanity, existence, and faith. We have, so talking about C.S. Lewis, the Paralandra. Okay, I have that hideous strength as well. I don't have Out of the Silent Planet here, but Paralandra, he was talking about questions of this. The main character, Ransom, goes to this planet, Venus, and they have their version of Adam and Eve there. And it's there is some really deep theological and philosophical questions they're asked. It's told in an engaging story that it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. You'd enjoy the story. At least I would think so. It was enjoyable. Now it's a little bit dated because it's 1930s, I believe, is when he had written it, and it was also written by somebody in the UK. So there's a little bit of cultural differences there, but overall, I think it's a compelling story, and I think at least one of you guys in the chat had read it. I did a review with Eric on his channel a while back on all 3 of those books. Okay, so Kamachi has plenty of themes that could be applied to all science fiction stories. Sorry, you already did that. It says, looks fine. Good. Brother, I love you. Fingers look fine. And then look at the pinky, Kamachi. Don't look at the pinky. Don't look at the pinky. There's what was that with Star Trek? He said with Captain Picard, there's only 5 lights instead of 4. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. So moral and ethical questions, and we do have historical successes where Lord of the Rings was a huge success, especially in making the movies. I think they did a really good job transferring the text to the movies. They did the movies. Not everything in the book was in the movie, which I think was fine. There were some sections that were skipped there, but they did a good job with it. So when you get down to it, we would expect, I think from our discussion, we would expect to see that Christian science fiction or Christian fiction in general would be written by a Christian, number one, and then have one or more of the following: Christian themes, Christian characters, worldview, biblically based morals shown by at least one character, maybe some biblical references if it's appropriate. I tried to put some in, but it just on a couple places in I think 3 novels. I don't remember. It sometimes it just doesn't fit. And the story has to be king. The story is the most important thing. If your characters, if it's out of character for one of your characters to do it, don't put it in there. And then another thing, it have redemptive ending. So it can have all those qualities. Christian author have one of those qualities, one or more of those qualities, and be very careful in how you're dealing with explicit language, graphic violence, or sexual content. There may be a place for it. Now, personally, I would have a problem with sexual content if it goes too far because of my past problems with pornography. I would not want. I got to stay clear of that. Just like it's like alcoholism with me. Nope, I'll skip. Not for me. And then it would also have maybe a positive message overall. Maybe not. You would maybe have an anti-hero where the end is maybe a warning. But in that warning, it in itself is positive overall. So I think that's kind of how we've looked at it so far in our chat tonight. And I think that's a pretty good roundup for it. I'm going to look at any last minutes. No, don't look at the pinky. There are 4 lights. Yes, there are 4 lights. You could use verses as a header at the beginning of the book or the chapter. Well, okay. So Frank Herbert did this with Dune, and I think he did it to good effect. He would have like a phrase or a proverb or something, a saying that would be given by one of the particular groups within his world that he's built, like the Spacing Guild. They might say something, or the Bene Gesserits, they might say something in there. It might be a quote out of one of their books. And it did a really good job of framing not so much the chapter, but the world that he's building. It added some depth. It put some layers there. And he really thought he did a very good job of building this world. It's deep. And even though he wasn't a Christian and some of his worldview is, whoa, dude, seriously, stay off the drugs. But I think he did a good job there too, with at least the world building. Okay. Coming up, we have, okay, just a minute. Before we do coming up, I want to show you this. So these are some images of maybe what a future church would look like. I don't know. Trying to envision what church building would look like in the distant future. Say if Jesus doesn't return in the next 1,000 years or so, what would a church building look like in whatever culture that's developed at that point? Be a good question. Okay, so we have coming up on Thursday, we're going to be looking at the conference. I'm going to be doing an interview with Eric, and we're going to be talking about behind the scenes with the conference that's coming up. This is the Seek and Share Truth Conference. There's going to be multiple speakers that are going to be given there. If you look at the description of that live stream, I put it up earlier today. It will show you who's going to be there. There's going to be, of course, you're going to have David Wood. You're going to have Vocab Malone that's going to be there, Anthony Rogers, and a slew of others. Now, there's one person in particular that's coming from out of country, and I want to be careful in saying who this person is because of death threats and other things that are going on. But if you look at the description for that conference that's coming up, you'll see some of the names there. I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to be a very good conference. We did it last year. It's fantastic. And so that next Tuesday, we're going to be looking at some of the highlights for the conference. Same conference, but we're going to be looking at highlights of it. And then next Thursday, we're going to get back on track and talking about different reviews of movies, looking for Christian themes in them. And we're going to have our guest back on this. So we're going to be joined by Jono from Culture Crusader, looking at the Avengers Age of Ultron. And why would we be looking at an older movie? Like, this isn't like 1960s or 70s or 80s or anything like that, but it is older. It came out a few years ago. There are some timely messages that are in this that would hit us right where we are now. And I think it's worthwhile to take a deeper look at this and ask some questions and look for the theme. Is there some examples there? Look, in one of the questions that could be asked is it worth the risk? Just think of Ultron. You might have some answers there. Well, until then, I appreciate all the interaction we've had here. It's been fantastic. You guys are deep thinkers. And I think we did a pretty good job of wrapping our arms around the definition of what Christian science fiction or Christian fiction in general is and the purpose that it has. We've got to be very careful. We've got to be skilled in our labor, skilled in our work, in our craftsmanship. And if we are, we can probably produce some pretty good stuff. So looking forward to you next time.